Welcome to the License to Lead podcast. I'm Patty Fay. This podcast is for physicians or anyone who thinks healthcare needs a transformation led by physicians. License to Lead means that physicians are charged with and must be in charge of guiding the vision and the culture of healthcare systems. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Espresso Shot episode of the License to Lead podcast. My Espresso Shot episodes are designed to be short but potent doses of something that's good for what ails us in the world of medicine. Barbara McAneny, oncologist, former AMA president, and fierce patient and physician advocate, joins me today. We both tip our hands about the presentations we're giving at the Ending Physician Burnout Global Summit. I was talking with Dr. McAneny on a different topic. I had asked her to join me to shine the bright light of her intellect and expertise into that big, dark, smelly sewer that we call pharmacy benefits managers. That conversation was a humdinger and will be a full-length episode coming up soon on the License to Lead podcast. But since I had her corralled on Zoom, I also asked her to chat with me about the speeches we were both giving at the upcoming summit. Dr. McAneny does not mince words. Here, she explains why we should not wad up and throw away the physician career. Well, good morning, Dr. McAneny. It is fantastic to have you on the License to Lead podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for asking me to join you.
I really enjoyed our conversation last time. You and I are both part of the Ending Physician Burnout Global Summit, which is coming up August 24th to 26th. And I wonder if you would want to just mention what message you hope to deliver. What do you want to hammer home when it comes to physician burnout?
We're facing a significant shortage of physicians. Physicians are not replaceable by people who have less education or different education. Physicians are a unique group, and we are needed to be able to manage care. If we drive physicians from the profession, or we impair them to the point that they can't develop empathy for their patients, which is the definition of burnout, then we are really going to not only impact that physician, but we're going to impact all the patients that they are trying to treat and all the patients that won't get treated if they leave the profession. So I feel this is a very important issue.
What do you think is maybe one or two of the biggest causes of physician burnout?
My personal belief is that it's loss of control over your practice. Physicians are taught to make important decisions with patients about the health of patients. Having a third party intervene in that or control that decision or make it more difficult for the physician to come to that conclusion are incredibly frustrating. And repeated frustration at not being able to do what you've been trained to do leads to burnout.
Right. I know that there is a lot of discussion of what I refer to as a special subset of burnout applicable to physicians, which is moral injury. And can you talk about that?
Moral injury, I look at as being forced by external processes like insurance company prior authorization processes or insurance company denials or the constraints put on if one is employed by a hospital system, et cetera, in being able to give that patient what you think is their optimal choice. If you think that a certain drug or procedure is optimal or that the certain referral that you would like to make is not part of your hospital system, and therefore you are coerced to not send that patient to that out of the hospital employment process position, you have to come to grips as a physician with the fact that you are not telling a patient about their best option and that you are recommending second best. And that's a moral dilemma that eats at you, usually at 3 a.m. And it makes people angry that they're put in this position. It makes them ashamed if they don't fight back. And it makes them just burnt out if they continue to either swallow it or fight it. So there's no winning for that physician.
Right. It just erodes any margin that they have, any cognitive margin that they might have that's already getting chewed up by 1,000 clicks on the computer.
I'd also comment about resilience. There's a lot of temptation to say, well, if physicians can make them more resilient, that's yoga at lunch phenomenon. We'll just make you stronger so that you can withstand this. That's the wrong answer. That's blaming the physician for the moral injury that's being inflicted on them by others. The answer to burnout is not to teach physicians to accept moral injury. It is to eliminate the moral injury that they are being forced to confront.
I 100% agree with you on that. And I find it inexplicable that we've gotten into this situation where almost the reflex response is a chief wellness officer and maybe a weekend wellness retreat and doing some more burnout surveys, although now we call them wellness surveys. I think it does come back to this idea of the canary comes back out of the mine and we are fluffing it up and, putting a little Band-Aid on it and sending it back rather than dealing with what's in the mine.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
Our system requires fixing, and physicians are that canary because a patient sees the dysfunction of the system one time when they're confronting it on their own. And if the physician is skillful at managing the moral dilemmas, the patient may never know that dilemma existed. They may never know there was a better option somewhere for them that the insurance company, the employer, whomever would not allow the physician to deliver. But the physician knows it, and they know it over and over and over again. And therefore, when the system starts to really fail, physicians exit when they can't take it anymore. The temptation of a lot of employers is to replace them with lesser trained people who are more apt to not know that there is a better option and therefore are quite comfortable following the requirements of that employer or the requirements of that insurance company. Because if you don't know there's another option, you're quite comfortable with giving the recommended option. After all, it's recommended. So that is what I'm seeing in a lot of areas, but that lowers the quality of healthcare. Patients need to know all of their options. They need to know the good ones and the bad ones. They need to understand what the dilemma is, because only if the patients understand it will they demand change. And physicians also need to demand some change to this system before it injures more patients.
It does seem like one of the strategies for people that are running our healthcare systems is to replace physicians with our 15,000 hours of in-depth training to become physicians. We basically trade in our 20s
right
to develop our expertise in medicine. The money drops to the bottom line if people who are in charge of healthcare systems trade in physician salaries for lesser trained, whether it's a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant. They are wonderful parts of a team, but when they're given independent practice options, it's frightening. I don't know if you've seen any issues where that trade has been made to the detriment of a patient.
Absolutely. Personally, I'm offended when I refer a patient of mine, a cancer patient, to another physician and discover that the only consultation that I get back is from the nurse practitioner or the PA, because I'm sending that patient over to that physician because I want someone who knows more in that area than I do, not less. Physicians can use extenders very well, but they should not be considered oncologist light or neurologist light or any such specialty, because it does not do the patient the best service they could have.
Yeah.
The idea of independence is an illusion anyway. None of us practice independently. For each of us, we have a box in which we have studied extensively and feel competent. And for each of us, when a patient has a problem that is not within our box, we need to be able to yell for help with another colleague whose expertise includes that new problem. So the idea that I can manage a heart attack as well as a cancer and deal with a broken bone or something else is ludicrous. We all have to practice interdependently.
Yes. So at the Ending Physician Burnout Global Summit that's coming up, my focus is going to be on what I refer to as the business school mindset. As we've talked about before, for some reason, probably for a lot of reasons, in healthcare, in medicine, as it turns out, unlike other traditional professions of architecture, clergy, law, in medicine, the professionals only run about 5% of our healthcare systems and hospitals. And 95% of the organizations where patients are cared for are run by people who have gotten their training in business schools. There is an ideology associated with business schools, especially the elite business schools. It's referred to technically as managerialism. And I use the 3-letter acronym BSM for business school mindset. And I really want to point to the fact that the culture of our healthcare organizations and medicine have been extremely influenced by the business school mindset, or BSM. And what that consists of is an overwhelming preoccupation with profits. That overwhelming preoccupation with profits, with making money as opposed to serving patients, is something that I think has a big impact on burnout. In my opinion, it is the underpinning factor. It is really the cause of burnout among physicians. It leads to, as you mentioned, the loss of autonomy that physicians are faced with. It's the reason my podcast is called License to Lead. I'm so interested in anything that we can do to promote physician leadership. We know the studies, especially the ones led by Amanda Goodall and others for the last decade, have shown that when physicians do lead healthcare systems and hospitals where patients are cared for, that the outcomes are better. I want to put that idea out there in a big way, that the business school mindset, which includes the concept of rational egoism, which is basically that the only rational decision a person makes is one that is in our own best interest. And that is the mindset or the ideology associated with business schools. And that's not me making it up. That comes from within the business schools. Hundreds of articles and dozens of books that have been written that talk about managerialism and the impact it has on society, and definitely has a big impact on healthcare because the MBAs and people from business schools are running our institutions.
And that's diametrically opposed to professionalism, whereas a profession is defined as being a self-policing organization that controls its own educational process to continually improve education and takes some sort of an oath to use that information, that education, to serve others rather than to be self-serving. So I think there's a lot of truth to what you say, and I'm very concerned as we see the growing employment of physicians. The other issue that I would consider in this is that we designate tax-exempt organizations as being not-for-profit. And the common understanding of not-for-profit means those are the good guys. If you're not-for-profit, you are doing good because you're not working for profit. I think we need to redefine that because all of them are working for profit. It's just if you pay taxes, you're for-profit. If you are tax-exempt, you are, quote, non-for-profit, unquote, and you have to call your profit retained earnings.
Are you saying that the leadership teams in the not-for-profit organizations are able to collect large bonuses and have outlandish CEO salaries?
Yes, perhaps I am. And they also have the other thing that happens with a lot of, quote, not-for-profit institutions is that they can own wholly owned for-profit subsidiaries that compete with other businesses in the community. But because they are wholly owned by a not-for-profit, they don't pay taxes, which gives you a great advantage. If you are, say, a hospital that owns a lot of land in your city, valuable land that you wish to develop, but you don't have to pay taxes on it.
So really, they are getting this designation as being a not-for-profit in exchange for some transparency about their earnings and a vow, I guess, to provide some community benefit.
It's not simply a vow. It's the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, has designated certain entities as tax exempt if they meet a certain level of charitable contribution to their community. So to have a charter as a tax-exempt organization, you have to be accepted by the IRS that you are going to produce so much benefit free of charge to the community. So hospitals have traditionally done that because there are a lot of uninsured people around. But we don't really have a very good or consistent way to measure how much charitable care is actually being given. And in hospitals, some will define the charitable care as care that pays less than what's on their charge master, which is a highly inflated list of prices. And some will charge it as care that's less than Medicare. And there's multiple numbers of definitions that can be manipulated for your free care. Also, Medicare gives hospitals back a lot of the money that they can designate as a charitable donation, as free care or bad debt. So it's very convoluted. It needs to be reevaluated. We need strong standards that say this is what a hospital needs to provide in terms of clear information on how much free care was delivered and to whom.
Yeah, it sounds like, I think last time when we spoke and we got started on pharmacy benefits managers, I knew we had to come back and dive into PBMs. And now, as you're talking about the charge masters and the obfuscation of all of the shenanigans going on with hospital charges and with their not-for-profit status and how that might be manipulated, we know that the charge master is a work of fiction. And for hospitals to be able to simply designate something as meeting their community benefits requirements by saying they're offering this care at something lower than their charge master rates, that is a complete fiction.
Yes.
Barbara, how does this stuff happen? Who's in charge? Who's watching this?
Well, Congress just decided not to increase the IRS's budget for being able to evaluate high-earning people. So I suspect no one is watching that particular henhouse.
Honestly. Well, is there anything else that we should mention about the Burnout Summit? Anything that you want to say?
I think the Burnout Summit is addressing a very important workforce issue. We cannot afford as a nation to spend a decade training physicians and then wad them up and throw them away with burnout after 10 years of practice. We need people out there taking care of patients. And we need to take care of the mental health of people who are taking care of patients and not put them in impossible situations. My personal hope for this conference is that we can shift it from doctors, you're just wimps, you just need to be tougher and understand that, you don't always get to make the decisions you'd like to make, to let's look at a healthcare system in which physicians are not placed in the moral dilemma of putting their or their employers or their insurance company's best interest in front of their patient's best interest.
Yes, that's it. Thank you, Barbara, for being on the podcast and for spending the time with me.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Another thanks to my guest, Dr. Barbara McAneny. She filled my cup to the brim in this Espresso Shot episode. Listeners might want to keep an ear out for my upcoming full-length podcast with Dr. McAneny about all the ways pharmacy benefits managers harm patients and defraud everyone. I'd like to ignite more conversation, and I invite you to share these episodes far and wide with anyone you think might benefit from hearing them. And while you're at it, how about leaving a review for me? That would be nice. Presumably. And as always, thanks so much, everyone, for all of your care and caring.
Thanks for listening to the License to Lead podcast. Be sure to visit licensed2leadpodcast.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and sign up for our newsletter. Leave us a message with your provocative question or your thoughtful comments. You might inspire a future episode of the License to Lead podcast. Thanks so much, everyone.